everyone. We're just waiting for Eliza Knight to show up, so we're going to be on hold until she arrives, hopefully any minute now. Thanks for your patience. Hi, Eliza.
Hey, how are you?
Good. I'm going to join you up there on stage in just a minute, so give me a second. Hello.
Hello.
How are you doing?
Good, how are you?
Good. Where are you joining us from?
I am in Maryland.
Oh, okay. I wasn't sure. I knew you were at least on the East Coast, if not farther away. So, but we're glad you're here. We're going to go ahead and get started because it is, we do like to start punctually and people can join us as they are able. So hello, Firesiders, and welcome to Adventures by the Book, where our mission is to connect people and communities through the superpower of books. I'm your host, Susan McBeth. I'm joined by Amber Reinhart, my co-host. And today we're going to be chatting with USA Today best-selling author Eliza Knight about her new book, The Mayfair Bookshop. Yes, which we're very excited about. And we'll get to chatting with you in just a second. Today's Fireside Chat is part 4 of a 5-part series called Thankful for Reading. And each week for 5 weeks leading up, well, it was to be Thanksgiving, but that's okay. We're a little after. We can still be thankful going into the holiday season, where we chat with a different author each week about a different book and give you a sense of some of the books you can pick up for your holiday reads or after. Our approximate 45-minute chat today is intended as a conversation. So anybody in our live virtual audience, and you will see yourself on the screen below if you're in the virtual audience, can join us on stage at any time, ask questions, make comments, or just say hello. And did you know that if you are in the live virtual audience, you can also live broadcast to this to your social media channels, as I see Debbie and Amber are both doing. Thank you for doing that, because not only do we have a live audience listening in, but we also have people listening in live on our public profile page, which is firesidechat.com/Susan McBeth. You can join us there very easily, and you can also listen in on our social media channels. And after the event is over, this will get turned into a recording, and we air it on our YouTube channel, so you can listen in again, refer your friends, people who may be interested in hearing about the book, talking to Eliza Knight. And if you haven't already ordered a copy of her book, you can go to our website, adventuresbythebook.com. You will see the exact link in the fortune cookie scrolling in the middle of your screen right now. So we hope you pick up a copy and can enjoy that. But right now, we're going to be introducing Eliza, who is an award-winning and USA Today best-selling author. She is the creator of the popular historical blog, History Undressed, and a co-host on the History, Books, and Wine podcast. Her latest book, as I mentioned, The Mayfair Bookshop, available now, is a brilliant dual narrative story about Nancy Mitford, one of the 1930s London's hottest socialites, authors, and a member of the scandalous Mitford sisters. We love scandal, can't wait to hear about it. And a modern American desperate for change, connected through time by a little London bookshop. We're delighted that you are joining us here today, Eliza Knight. Welcome and congratulations on the book.
Thank you so much. I'm really excited to be here with you guys tonight. And I'm so excited that people get to read the book.
Yeah, me too. So for those who listen, and we always like to get started by hearing a little bit about the author's background before they became a renowned author. So, where your first inspiration, your love for books, for writing came about, if there was somebody special that inspired you along the way. And I did read that you were introduced to Nancy Mitford, the subject of your book, early on. So perhaps you can share that as well when you're telling us your background.
Sure. So I started making up stories before I could even write anything. I used to put together little books and color stories and draw, different scenes and things like that. And by the time I was in second grade, my teacher told my parents that I was going to be an author one day. And I had sort of like self-published this book called The Mouse Who Stole the Cheese and had passed it around to everyone. I had a cover made for it. I mean, that I made myself with construction paper. But I was pretty serious about it back then. And in third grade, I had my first story published. It was through a charity anthology that my school was putting together. That was like an alien story. And I have no idea why I was writing an alien story. I'm definitely not a sci-fi writer. And I continued writing throughout my entire childhood. In high school, I became the editor of my high school newspaper. And I actually originally went into college for journalism. And I studied journalism for a couple of years. But I found that I was having a lot more fun making the news articles and obituaries and things like that a little more flourished, which my professors were like, you can't do that as a journalist. You got to stick to the facts. And I was like, but isn't it so much more fun with all these details and all this extra stuff? And they were like, yes, but that's not what you're supposed to be doing. And it was at that time that I started taking some family studies classes as extracurriculars, just to sort of fill in the gaps. And I fell in love with family studies. So I'm going to take a step back to high school and when I got introduced to Nancy Mitford. So one of my high school teachers, I absolutely loved her. Everyone else didn't. And I loved her because one of the things that she loved to do for us was assign us different classical pieces of literature from whatever era we were learning about. And it just so happened when we were doing like a World War II era that she had us read one of Nancy Mitford's books, The Pursuit of Love. And I fell in love with that book and sort of had her on the background as one of my favorite authors. And didn't really look into her history or anything like that, just really enjoyed her stories. And then when I got into college, one of my family studies classes was on the different dynamics in families, you know, how families can be different. And even though you have multiple children from the same parents, they can all be different in different ways and how birth order plays into that, etc. And lo and behold, one of the families that the professor brought up was the Mitfords. And I was like, wait a second, my Nancy Mitford? And so we learned a little bit about her family, which is very different between the 7 siblings. I mean, we're ranging from communists to fascists to socialists, sort of running the gamut there. And then, you know, we've got the youngest who ended up becoming a duchess. So she wasn't really following along any of those lines. But in any case, I really fell in love with the family. So they just kind of stuck in the back of my brain for a while. And when I started writing novels back in 2006, I was writing a lot of different things. The first thing I wrote was a thriller. It's never been published. And then I started writing some historical fiction and some historical romance at the same time. And my romance took off. And my historical fiction was published about 6 years later, so 2014, and it was about the Tudors. And I kind of always had in the back of my head that I wanted to write something about Nancy just because I really admired her, and all of my historical fictions that I've written so far are biographical. So I tend to write about people and time periods that really existed, and I really like to explore why they were the way they were. But taking on Nancy felt like really daunting. And then 2019 comes along. I hear about Lily James is going to be remaking one of Nancy's books, The Pursuit of Love. And I had loved the Rosamund Pike version called Love in a Cold Climate, which was kind of a combo of both of her books. So I was like, well, that's interesting. Mitford's getting like a little resurgence here. Maybe I'll just dive in. So I emailed my agent and I was like, I'm thinking about doing this book. It's going to be pretty daunting task, but I'm in for it. And she was like, go ahead. Why don't you write up like a little pitch? We'll send it to your editor and see what she thinks. So I did that in about, I think it was January-ish 2020. And she was like, yes, love it. Write me chapters. So I started diving right in. And I had all these big plans. I was going to go to London, above the Mayfair Bookshop that I was writing about, which is called Haywood Hill. There's a flat you can rent. I was going to rent the flat and for like 2 weeks, just write this story. It was going to be glorious. And then March 2020 happened. And I don't know if anybody remembers what happened then, but March 10th, my oldest daughter was in college, and her college shut down. They recalled everyone from spring break to close down their dorms. So I had to drive to Ohio to do that. And then my other two kids, they were staying home. So in the midst of me making plans to go right over in London, everything's shutting down. And I'm like, great, this is crazy. I now have to figure out how to be like a teacher. I'm not a teacher. My husband was stuck overseas. He actually didn't end up coming home till that summer because he couldn't get back. So while I was writing this book, it was sort of like an escape for me from my own reality. So it ended up being like sort of a real deep and emotional exploration, even for me, through Nancy's story and through Lucy's story, because of all of the world things that were happening at that time. So yeah, that was a long answer to your question. I don't know if I...
No, that's good. And it actually, I'm going to jump ahead to a question I was going to ask you later, but since you already touched on it a little bit, is, the daunting task of writing about Nancy Mitford. And I suspect that there's been a lot written about her. And so how did you come to terms with that in the sense of what angle you were going to take? What was going to make it different and unique about it? And tell us what is unique about yours.
Sure. So there's a lot written about her, a lot of really great biographies. And around the same time that I wrote my book, there was another author who wrote one telling her story as well. And then, of course, in January, we have Marie Benedict's book coming out also about Nancy and her sisters. So I'm really excited about all of that, actually, because I think the more Mitfords, the merrier. And it's really exciting that people are sort of learning who she is, because a lot of readers have said, I've never heard of her before. This is fabulous. I never knew about this family. So I'm really excited that people are jumping on the bandwagon for that. But as far as the daunting task goes, I basically read every biography written about her. I bought all of the books that have her letters. And I just dove right in reading all of the letters. It was a lot of sifting through a lot of things like that. So it was difficult to figure out what I wanted to pinpoint and what I didn't. But the thing that I found the most fascinating about her, for me anyway, is the struggle to become a writer, but at the same and at the same time struggling with who she was as a person and how she differentiated herself from her family. Because I can't imagine, like, I have several siblings, and I can't imagine if one of them was like literally trying to date Hitler and the other one was having Hitler, secretly at their wedding. I don't know what I would do. And I feel like for her, she was really sort of compensating for all of that by being a war volunteer. And I've always been really fascinated with some of the things that women did during the war, because you don't really hear a lot about that. And she did pretty much everything. She was working in the morgue at one of the first aid posts. She was, writing people's names and information on their foreheads because they couldn't be identified, or they couldn't identify themselves. And, she tried to help her husband over in Perpignan and during another Civil War thing. And then she tried to drive an ambulance. That did not work out very well. I think she actually only ended up doing that for one day because she got into a car accident. And, she tried to talk on the as a radio host, but that also didn't work out for her. But then the other great thing is, her mom and obviously some of her siblings were fascists and didn't believe, I guess, that Jewish people had a place in the world, and she did. So she was happy to be the one that opened up their family home and brought in, 70 different refugees and helped take care of them. So I just find her, I guess, it's really her resilience and all of that to be really fascinating, because on the outside, she comes off as being a socialite, kind of spoiled and all this stuff, but there was so much more going on the inside. And one of the things that I really love to explore is obviously what makes people the way they are. And I know a lot of people throughout history, wrote about her and said that she was kind of really cruel, including her own sisters. I think it was Jessica that said something like, Nancy said something like, oh, sisters are, a saving grace against life's adversity. I totally messed up that quote. But then Jessica said, sisters are like basically the reason that we have these problems. And so I really wanted to sort of figure out what made her tick and why people thought that. And I think a lot of it was these inner struggles that she was dealing with with her family, with her love life, with her career. And so that was basically what I really wanted to explore in the book, is what made her tick and what made her eventually become a success, is all of that struggle. And I really kind of connected with that. Only, I mean, I didn't have to deal with World War II or anything like that. But if you're a mom stuck in the house, your spouse is overseas, and you're trying to teach fourth grade math and you don't know what you're doing, and then you've got, teenagers that are freaking out, they can't hang out with their friends and all this stuff. It was a little bit like a war zone in here.
Yeah, I can just imagine. So, for those, I know you talked a little bit about who she is, but for those who have never heard of Nancy Mitford, can you give a little brief bio other than what you've already talked about? Who is
Sure.
she?
Yeah, so she is a minor noblewoman. Her parents were Baron and Baroness Redesdale, and they actually weren't even supposed to become that. It was his older brother should have inherited everything, but he ended up passing away. So her father inherited the title and all of the lands and things like that. She was the oldest of 7 children that spanned quite an age range, which I find also really fascinating. So she was about 16 years older or so than her youngest sibling. There were 6 sisters and 1 boy in the middle. And they sort of formed their own little factions between the older kids and the younger kids who they hung out with, which I think happens a lot in families. My siblings and I'm the oldest, and we span about 12 years. And so there's like little factions here and there. And then my own kids span about 10 years. And so you can see between the different ages, they hang out with one or the other. But in any case, her grandfather owned a magazine, so she was kind of already in a little bit of the writing world. Her father helped manage the magazine, and she ended up writing for the magazine when she was younger. But I think she also kind of felt inferior about whether or not she was a good writer because she wasn't formally educated. Her parents believed that girls should be educated at home by their mother or by a governess, and since they didn't have that much money, it wasn't like they were hiring the top-notch governess, and the kids really wished that they could have been educated at school. The thing that they were fortunate enough was to have a vast array of books at home, which they read everything. She confessed probably some things they shouldn't have read, but they were not chaperoned by their parents and which books they pulled out. And so I think if you read her writing and any of her sisters' writing, they sound very educated. She knows a lot of things. She learned a lot on her own, so it doesn't come across that she wasn't educated, even though she says she was. But I think it always made her kind of feel a little bit inferior. So she was a socialite. She was part of the Bright Young Things, which were kind of like the bohemian aristocrats that sort of wreaked havoc after the Great War. They dressed up in costumes and would run loose in London and do all these different I'm losing the word where you search and find stuff. So they would do that, and they would go to parties. They even hosted this fake art gallery. They made up a fake artist, and they invited everyone to this gallery to view this piece. And it was like a cork board and rope piece of work. And they were like, "This is Bruno Hatt's work. He's so amazing." And it was almost reminded me of like what Banksy was back in the day before anyone really knew what he looked like. And they tricked everyone into coming to see this crazy piece of art. So they were just like having a lot of fun. That's sort of who she was, just a major socialite, and her sisters, followed along that same line. And she was friends with everyone, loved literature, and I think she made friends with a lot of writing artists like Even Wall and all of them. So she was a literati, I guess you could say, and just not your typical socialite, in that a lot of her friends during World War II would just go off to their houses in the country, and they were like, "We're just going to disappear. And, we're going to, when we're in London, we're going to lunch at the Ritz." And she did a little bit of that, but for the most part, I think she was appalled by that and really tried to help out her country. Is that?
Wow, that's a great introduction to Nancy Mitford. Thank you. And I was going to mention that your book is written in dual timelines. So one of the timelines is 1938 with Mitford and her family, her sisters, and So I was thinking about that, your comment about her younger siblings being, Nazi supporters. And I'm thinking, this was 1938. We have the benefit of, 80 years of history to know what Hitler was all about.
Yeah.
But in the 1930s, and especially because her siblings were younger and probably not as worldly, it may have sounded like some kind of, I don't know, exciting cult, or I don't know what it would have seemed. But she was, I mean, because she was older, maybe she had that worldliness about her that she saw through, what her younger siblings did not about Hitler.
Yeah, I think there was some of that. And then I think also there was some sort of I honestly can't answer why Unity and Diana were the way they were, because Unity, before she managed to convince her parents to send her to Germany to learn to speak German. And before she did that, she had idolized Hitler. She had his pictures on the wall. I think maybe she loved the way he spoke. I know a lot of people found him to be extremely charming and to be a good speaker. And, that was well before all of his takeover and everything like that. And so she was kind of already a fan of him. And when she went there to learn German, it was with the intent of meeting him. But then, she really turned vile. Like, she would speak at his rallies and say terrible things about Jewish people. And she would call it, like, in the letters she would write, she would write terrible things about the people. And she even wrote like a scathing letter to I think one of Hitler's men, saying how much she wanted these people to like be eradicated. And Diana too, she divorced her husband. She was originally married to the Guinness heir, like the beer, and married the British Union of Fascist Leaders. And she was going to the rallies in London, and she was going over to Germany and meeting with Hitler and trying to help him figure out how he could do some things in England, which is one of the reasons that she ended up being imprisoned, because they were so afraid of this relationship she had with Hitler. And like, I don't even know how they could rationalize that. And in a later interview, I think it was in the early 80s or late 70s, that I watched Diana give, someone asked her about Hitler and she said, well, he really is quite charming. And I was just shocked at that she was still at that age and time and knowing everything that happened. She just didn't care.
Hmm. Interesting. So
Yeah.
that's the 1938 timeline. And
Yeah.
then you also have the other timeline of present day with your protagonist, Lucy St. Clair.
Yeah.
First of all, real or fictional?
She's fictional.
She's fictional. Okay. And she's a book curator.
Yeah.
So tell us more about how you created Lucy St. Clair and intertwined those dual narratives.
Sure. So Lucy St. Clair was, when I originally made the plot of the book, I wanted her to be a distant relative of Nancy's former fiance, who was Hamish in the book. And so that's how I kind of linked them together. So she's distantly related to Nancy's former fiance. And then I wanted her to have a really cool book job that would make her be able to travel from here, where I am, over to London, and what would put her in Nancy's space. And one of the things that I've always thought would be the best job ever in the world, if I wasn't an author, because that's the best job, but would be to be a book curator, where you are designing people's personal libraries and you're picking the books and you get to read all these books and you're designing things. I just think that would be super cool. So I really wanted her to have that job. But I also needed something more of a concrete connection between her and Nancy. And so I had it be sort of like a search for this missing woman named Iris. And the book, she found, her mother had originally been to Haywood Hill Bookshop early on in her life and found a book that had this inscription on it that Nancy had left at the bookshop for Iris, but Iris had never picked it up. So it had been sort of a mystery that her and her mother had been trying to figure out for most of her life. And then when her mother passed away, she decided, this is like a personal mission for me to figure out who Iris is, because, it's not any of Nancy's friends. And so I think for me, the reason I wanted to have the modern day character was because I wanted to reveal who Nancy was bit by bit to a modern reader and to the modern world, just the way I had learned it. I mean, I wasn't a book curator or searching for a missing person, but I had figured out who she was through literature and studying her family. So I thought it would be fun to sort of clone that a little bit in the book. So as Lucy's figuring out who she is and discovering all of these things about Nancy, the reader is too.
Great. And so Nancy seems, when you think about her, you think she lived this dazzling, glamorous life. But in reality, it wasn't exactly that, right? I mean, she
Yeah.
has some troubled love relationships, and you mentioned, the Nazi ties and
Mhm.
that her siblings had, and a challenge with making ends meet, and some other things. Can you talk a little bit about what her life was really like?
Yeah. So, on the outside, everything seems glamorous, like you said, but on the inside, she's really struggling. She had a failed relationship with a man for a number of years who she thought was going to end up marrying her and was sort of just playing her, I guess. And then in her marriage, she was extremely unhappy. Her husband couldn't keep a job. And because her parents weren't well off, her allowance wasn't very much. And she wasn't making very much money in her writing career either. So they were constantly struggling to make ends meet. But on the outside, you had to look like the part. And it was something she'd kind of grown up with because they didn't have much money when she was growing up either. So their seamstress at home would make their dresses to look like something fashionable from the store. And her mother actually raised chickens and would sell eggs in their, village or whatever. And the kids would sell them too for extra money. So I think it was something that she kind of had grown up and learned how to deal with. But the funny thing about that is when she finally did get success in the late 40s, she wore nothing but Dior after that. she was like, nope. And she never remarried. And I think part of that is because she had struggled so much that she was like, I'm going to be in charge of me now, and I'm not going to take anything else. So, when I say they didn't have much money, one thing Diana did say that I was like, okay, that's a good thing. She said, we were poor, but in the sense of being poor with your rich friends. Like, they had mansions and they had servants and they had all of that stuff. They traveled everywhere, but their friends had more. So they weren't, actually poor. They just called themselves poor because they didn't have as much as their other wealthy noble friends. So maybe if they didn't have champagne tastes, they would have been able to get by a little more, and it would have been easier.
Yeah, wealth is always relative, isn't it?
Right?
So your character Lucy St. Clair lands a job working at Haywood Hill Bookshop, which is an actual bookshop with a historical significance,
Yeah.
which I found interesting. But then I also found it interesting that your book is called the Mayfair Bookshop. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yes. So my book, I can't remember what I originally titled it. It was not originally the Mayfair Bookshop. I don't even think Bookshop was in there. I think I originally wanted to title it like Bright Young Things or something like that. And then because the Haywood Hill Bookshop is in Mayfair, my publisher they really wanted to have bookshop in the title, and they wanted it to be the Little London Bookshop. And I didn't like that because there's a lot of Little London bookshops, and honestly, there's a lot of Mayfair bookshops too. And we went through a lot of different titles for it, and they just really loved the Mayfair Bookshop as the title.
Oh, okay.
So
So
the thing with like books and authors is we don't always get a choice in what the title is. I think ultimately I do love the title now because both timelines do take place near the bookshop and the bookshop plays a part in both timelines. But it wasn't my original.
yeah,
That's why there's the subtitle also, which is a novel of Nancy Mitford and the Pursuit of Happiness, because I really wanted to also play into the fact that I was really exploring her struggles and her ultimate goal to reach, that pinnacle point of like satisfaction and contentment.
yeah, and I'm glad you didn't call it the Little London Bookshop too. It's
Thank
just
you.
so generic,
Yeah.
Yeah. So I know that Amber is burning to ask questions. So I'm just going to
Sure.
ask one more because I was reading some of your book reviews, and I like to do that for authors that we feature on our show because book reviews are so interesting, and what people sometimes have the audacity to say, and it's just beyond me. And I know every author deals with this: good reviews, bad reviews. I'm curious what you think. Well, first of all, I wanted to mention that I saw New York Times and international best-selling author Natasha Lester
Mhm.
wrote a really nice review that said that you have achieved the bookish equivalent of a chocolate cake, which I
I
can't
love
think of
that so much.
a higher accolades than chocolate cake. A
I thought that was
delightful
awesome.
treat. Nancy Mitford had an extraordinary life, and Elizabeth Knight skillfully manages research, legend, fact, and fiction to bring us a truly absorbing novel, which I love that review.
Thank you.
But reviews run the gamut, right? And I want to, since it's so important for authors to have reviews written about their work. And I encourage everyone in the audience who's read her book or who's reading her book to do so. It only takes a few minutes to go on Goodreads or Amazon and give it a rating and just say a few words. You don't have to write an erudite monologue or anything, but just a few words. I love this, or some so and so resonated with me. But can you talk a little bit about reviews? What that means to an author? Are you one of the authors who reads her reviews, and how do you handle negative reviews? And do you just focus on the positive ones? Talk a little bit about reviews and what that means to you.
Sure. I absolutely love reviews because I love that people can share with anyone in the world that they read a book and what they thought about it. I obviously really like the nice ones the most, but I do read every review. Some people say I am a glutton for punishment because some of them aren't very nice, but I read every one because I feel like I can learn from everything. Maybe not some of the meanest ones. I had someone say, "Oh, she must be a," they said something really mean, like something like, um, she must be a vegan Republican," and I'm like, I don't even know what that means, and that's the weirdest thing I've ever heard.
Yeah.
Why are we even talking about that? But anyways, I do read every single one because I think I can learn from stuff. Maybe not that comment, but I also just like to see what people are thinking. And obviously, not every book is going to be for everyone. So even if people don't like it, I'm not going to be super mad. I think everyone's entitled to their opinion, and I don't like some books too, so that's okay. But I think reviews are a great way for people to share what they thought about a book, and especially if they liked it. And they help us as authors get the word out about our books. Because obviously, if people are leaving a review, they're sharing it with people. And also, when people are looking at a book, they're going to read the reviews to see if it's something that they might want to read. And something that you might like or something that you might not like could be opposite for somebody else. So that's a really long-winded answer to your question. But basically, I do love reviews. I read them all. And yeah.
Well, thank you for sharing your candor with us. So I am going to pass the mic over to Amber because I know she's burning to ask you some questions. And I know she's been a little under the weather. So if she isn't able to hold up, I do have her questions that she submitted to me and can
Okay.
follow up. But I'm hoping that because she's such an avid reader and such a great moderator, that I want her to be able to chat with you. So
Awesome.
welcome, Amber.
Hi, Eliza. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Hello.
Oh, awesome. Okay. Yes, I'm going to keep my video camera off, and I will save you all the favor of having to see me because I am a little under the weather. But I do have some questions that I want to ask you. So first of all, it's just so nice to meet you.
It's
You're a
nice to meet you.
fantastic writer.
Thank you.
But most of my questions just have to do about the writing process in general. So I just want to start off with what is the writing process like for you? Do you have a schedule, an outline? Are you a plotter? Do you use vision boards? What does that look like for you?
I am a very I am a plotter, and I'm also obsessed with charts. So every
Nice.
book that I have has a chart, um, and timelines and planners. A lot of my friends actually tease me because I have planners for my planners. Like
Same. I have 3 planners.
I
Yeah.
live by them. And I have whiteboards and I have little charts that I print out, and I am very strict with how much writing I need to get done each day. I try to only work Monday through Friday, and I'm really good at working early in the morning. So from about 7 to 10 is normally when I get in a lot of deep writing. And depending on what book, I have a set goal of how many words I need to reach each day. And I actually sprint my writing by hour, sometimes by 30 minutes, with several friends. We text each other first thing in the morning and we get to it. And then the thing that's great about that is they hold you accountable to keeping your goals. And since I am super goal oriented, I love that kind of stuff. So yeah, I plot everything. I guess I should say, like, I plot everything out pretty strictly, but I also am okay if things change, because as you get to know a character or a story, like, obviously things have to change, and I'm okay with that. I've never been super upset when I have to, kill off a character or delete them completely or change a chapter or something like that. Um, and as far as like the writing process goes, my first drafts are always fairly ugly. Like, I would never let anyone read my first draft ever. They're very ugly. There's like no description. Sometimes I'll read it, I'm like, what was I even saying here? I don't even know what this means.
Vomit draft.
And then I just delete it because I don't know what that was. Like,
Yes.
so the first part for me is just really getting the main parts of the story on the page, and it's also sort of like an exploration of the character. I do try to figure out my character's goals and motivations and their background and everything before I write, obviously, because I do a lot of plotting and research up front. But for me, the writing process is also really learning who they are. So my second draft is a lot more of the filling in the blanks part. Like, adding in a lot of the emotional reactions, the details. If I need to do a little deeper dive into something, like research wise, then I'll do that at that point as well. And it can take me, I would say it takes me probably the same amount of time to revise as it does to write the first draft, because I am basically rewriting the whole first draft, but nicer. And at that point, I send it to my critique partners, and then they, shred it, and I love that. I'm not someone who gets hurt feelings if someone says the sentence is horrible and I don't know what language you're speaking. I'm okay with that because I want the book to be amazing. So after I get my critique partner notes back, I'll go through it again, and then I'll usually read it one whole more time to make sure that everything's sort of fluid and fleshed out before I send it to my editor.
Oh, I love
And
that so much.
Sorry, I don't mean to interrupt Amber, but I was remiss in mentioning something before I introduced her, is that just a reminder that anybody in the virtual audience can invite themselves up on stage. And how you do that, if this is your first time on Fireside, is you go to the little circle on the lower left-hand corner of your screen, and you click on that, and it says invite to stage, and you can invite yourself up and ask a question, say hello, have a comment, whatever you'd like. And we love these chats to be interactive. So don't be shy. Join us up on stage while Amber's continuing with her questions.
Yes, thank you for actually making that announcement, because I was writing down everything Eliza was saying as you were saying that. So thank you, Eliza.
You're
I
welcome.
have another question, and then I'll let Debbie ask one too, because I don't want to hog the stage. Um, but Stephen King has mentioned before that as writers, like when we are writing and crafting something, sometimes we write for the ideal writer. And for him, that's his wife. He writes with her in mind. So I'm just curious, do you have someone in mind that you're writing for? Is it for yourself? Is it for your characters? Or are you just writing?
So I think it depends on the book. When I'm writing biographical, I think part of me is writing for the character because I want to tell her story in the best way, and I want people to see her for who she really is. And even though that's super intimate and personal, like, I just feel like part of me is like connecting with them while I'm learning who they are. And I don't want me to like sound woo woo or anything like that, but sometimes it feels like they're sharing their story with me too. There's definitely been like times that I've thought something and then I'll go see it in research later and I'm like, oh my gosh, I just wrote that and I didn't even know. And that totally could be that I read it at some point during the research because I read so much for my projects that it could have been something I read earlier on, but it sort of feels like I'm channeling them sometimes. And as far as like an ideal reader or anything, I just feel like I like to share my stories with like anyone who's interested in reading them. So I get really excited when people want to talk about the books and like this, and when you guys asking questions. And yeah, and maybe for myself, I guess, because I love reading and I love coming up with stories and researching and all of that. So it's a fun exploration for me diving into a character's mind and their world.
Thank you so much, Eliza. I love
You're
those
welcome.
answers.
Thank you.
And I'm going to pass the mic off to Debbie because it looks like she has a question too.
Sure.
Thank you. Hi, Eliza.
Hello.
It's such a pleasure to be listening in on this and seeing your face, and I'm loving this conversation. I loved the
Thank you.
book. I had never heard of Nancy Mitford or the
Thank you
Mitfords,
so
I have
much.
to admit. So it was really, really interesting to me. And you're obviously a huge research fan from what you're saying and just from the book itself. And there's, I'm sure, a lot of information that can be gathered about Nancy's life. So I was reading your author's notes, and you said the project was a massive undertaking that was years in the making, but rest assured, every decision made was done so with great consideration. That really touched me as a reader. That might sound really corny, but I really appreciated that. And I kind of wonder because, you know, authors go down these rabbit holes, and we've heard authors, historical fiction authors say, you know, well, you have to cut it off at some point, which you obviously do. But when you're writing about someone such as Nancy Mitford, where there's obviously a great amount of information to be had. Where does, when you give great consideration to whether or not you can stop going down the rabbit hole and start saying, well, I'm going to fill in the gaps here, or what does that mean?
So for her story, a lot of that meant that I was not including a lot of stuff. So she led such a full life and a packed life. So for example, she had like over 100 friends, but in the book, you see, I only concentrated on a couple of her friends because I couldn't focus on every single relationship she had. The book would have been like 100-book series or something like that. So a lot of what I meant about that that comment was specifically that I couldn't include a lot of stuff. Now, as far as I didn't make very many changes in her life story that I wrote. The one biggest thing, obviously, is the friend Sophie is not a real person. I did make her up, and the reason I did that was because, as I mentioned, all of her other friends that she has, she never really had necessarily a super deep connection, I feel like, with any of them. A lot of it was superficial. They didn't really know what was going on deep inside, and I don't feel like she could honestly ever really be like 100% herself. She had to sort of put on the Nancy show. And so with Sophie, she was just a normal person that she could just be normal with, and that helped me get a relationship on the page with her that was more normal versus more like superficial, these are my party friends or these are my literary friends. I just wanted her to have like a friend, and that helped to help the reader connect more with her. And a fun side note about the research, I was super disappointed because while I was writing, it was COVID and I couldn't go to, at the Ohio State University Rare Book Room, there's a Jessica Mitford collection, which has a lot of Nancy's letters in it. And I couldn't go, but after I had finished the book, I did finally get to go. My daughter actually works in the Rare Book Room because that's where she goes to school, and she was able to sneak me in. She asked permission from her boss, and I got to actually hold some of the letters, including one that Peter wrote to Jessica when she had eloped. And wow, he really did write very much like a toll gator. So anyways, I just wanted to add that in because you mentioned the research.
I'm glad you did, actually, because I was wondering, you included a lot of letters in your book, and I was wondering if they were real.
Those I did make up. I didn't want to, I think there's two instances that I used like a couple of lines from a letter because they wrote it better. And I'm not saying I wrote letters better, but I wanted the chapters to be kind of epistolary, and I couldn't include all of her letters because they're not mine. And I wanted to relay things that were going on in her life through her writing. And so those I did make up.
Great, thank you. And I know Amber probably has a few more questions, but we are running close to the end of time. So I wanted to remind anyone in the virtual audience, if they have questions, now's your last chance to jump up while Amber's finishing up her last questions.
Okay, I'll ask one more
Okay.
because I know we're running out of time. And it's just my favorite question to ask any author, which is, do you have any advice for your own younger writer self when you were just starting out?
Yeah. So it's actually the same advice that I give any new writer or any writer at any point who's asking for anything. And it's just be persistent with yourself and, don't stop. So, for example, so I got this tattoo. I got it with 5 of my friends at a writer's conference. Like, we just randomly went and got it. We're like, this is perfect for us. And it says, nevertheless, she persisted, and we got it in typewriter font. And basically what it means is that we will keep going. We're not going to stop no matter if you get a rejection or you get a bad review or you get a bad critique or whatever it is. You're just going to keep on going with your art. Don't stop. Just keep going. That's the biggest thing that I can say to anyone and my past self, and which I really believe in.
Is one of your buddies?
I need to get that tattoo.
Heather Webb. Is Heather Webb one of your buddies who got one of those tattoos?
Heather Webb is a really good friend, but she doesn't have the tattoo. However, Madeline Martin, who I know you've had on before, she is one of the ones that got the tattoo with me.
Yeah,
Oh,
that's
wow.
great.
Yeah.
I love that.
All right,
Thank you
Amber,
so much,
did you have anything
Eliza.
else?
You're very
No, that
welcome.
was
This
it.
has been amazing.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Amber. And I think Debbie has one more quick question before we close out. Debbie, did you have another question?
No, not really a question. I just didn't get a chance to say thank you. I appreciated your answer, and I think you could write books. I mean, you could write there's so much you could write on each of the sisters. Maybe there's something coming in the future for that. I don't know, but and I'll leave it to readers to look at. But at the end of your book, for the love of books, your finishing quote from George R.R. Martin. Oh my gosh, that would be the perfect way to close out this show. But I'll defer to Susan to close it out. But people will have to be intrigued now and look that up. But that's just beautiful. So thank you, and I look forward to meeting you in San Diego for Superbook. I'm super excited for that.
I'm really excited about that as well. Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you.
We're glad you're coming to that. And that reminds me is, upcoming events, Adventures by the Book. If you're going to be in Southern California or want to come to Southern California in February, and who doesn't want to escape some of those brutal winters and come to San Diego, we are having Superbook 4, which is our annual play on Super Bowl, except it's with 20 best-selling authors, including Eliza Knight. You get to meet some amazing people, including the founding drummer of Maroon 5 and lots of other New York Times bestsellers. It's going to be a fun event. You can check out our website, adventuresbythebook.com, to get more information. Our next big virtual event is on Zoom. It is called Pitch Fest, and this is our first ever event of its kind. We invited 20 authors, from debut authors to international bestsellers and New York Times and everyone in between. And they get like 5 minutes each to pitch their book to you. And the idea behind this is really to help you select your next reads for 2023. You can meet 20 best-selling authors and their books and get an idea of what their books are about, what they're like. They're all available to talk via our Service Novel Network, where we connect authors with book clubs, and you can schedule book club visits with any of these authors at any time. And then our next event on Fireside is part 5 of our Thankful for Reading series with Elizabeth de Veer, and she's going to be talking about her book, The Ocean in Winter. We also have on Friday, we also have on Friday a new kind of event called From Story to Film, and it's one of our author friends in San Diego who wrote a short story during the pandemic called Pandemic Bread, and a filmmaker picked it up and is now making a film about it, and she's going to be talking about the whole process while she's baking bread and it has to be in my home. I told her it has to be
That's
here.
cool.
So when she takes the bread out of the oven, we can all taste it. Yes, absolutely. But if you're not familiar with our events, you can go to our website, adventuresbythebook.com, find out more information. You can also go there. The link is in the fortune cookie to pick up a copy of the Mayfair Bookshop, Eliza's book, which we are thrilled you chatted with us today. Thank you. And where can they find you on social media, website, anything you want to share, Eliza?
Sure. So my website is elizaknight.com. I am on Twitter at Eliza Knight. I'm on Instagram as at Eliza Knight Fiction, and also the same for Facebook at Eliza Knight Fiction.
And she is now on Fireside. You can click on
Yes.
her icon and follow her here so that anytime she's on, you can follow her. You can also click on my icon or Amber's, and we're here weekly pretty much talking with authors. And you can also check out our audience, all the Firesiders in the virtual audience who are all interesting people, and you can follow them as well because you never know what you're going to learn and who you're going to meet on Fireside. I think that's it. We thank you, Eliza, for chatting with us today. We loved your book and loved chatting with you about it. We thank our virtual audience and those in our public profile page and social media. And until next time, ask yourself this question: what is your next adventure by the book? Thank you, everyone, and good night.
Bye. Thank you.